Gentlemen, start your engines. Ready. After a year of work, planning. Ready. After weeks of practice, tuning. Ready. Ready. Tony Holman signals for the pace lap to begin.
Born December 9th, 1926, to parents Daniel and Mary Alleian, Edward Goulbend Alleian would become the second of 4 children for the couple. Being American immigrants, times would prove challenging for the young family. Dan would work as a tailor and could only provide so much for the poverty-stricken couple. Things soon became much darker when in 1940, their youngest son, and third of 4 children, Leon, would be killed in a car accident at only 11 years old. Ed at the time was 13 and was hardened by his tough upbringing, only getting tougher as he reached adulthood. By the time he turned 18, he was enlisted into the final days of World War II, serving in the Navy on the USS Seed for only 3 months. When he returned in November of 1945, he became more involved in local motorsports and found admiration for another local Californian driver, Bill Vukovich. Bill would dominate much of post-war racing on the West Coast. And not only would Ed admire the man, but he would befriend the driver and grow close with him as he began ascending through the rungs of motorsports. By the early 1950s, the two decided to move together out to Indiana. Ed and Bill grew even closer through this time, as they both ascended through the AAA and USAC ranks. In 1952, Bill got his first big opportunity at the Indianapolis 500. He capitalized, leading 150 laps before breaking down late and losing in heartbreaking fashion. In 1953, Vukovich returned with a vengeance, claiming his first win in the race. In Victory Circle, friends and family serenaded the California driver, including Ed, captured in some of the Victory Lane photos, celebrating with Bill, making a moment for the two neither one of them would ever forget. Later that year, in the Hoosier 100, Ed would finally make his AAA debut, finishing 9th driving the 57 car. The good times continued into 1954, with Ed attempting his first ever Indianapolis 500. He was driving the number 27, and he would come home 18th, whilst Vukovich would win back-to-back, becoming only the 3rd man to achieve that feat in the sport's history. Vukovich also became the first man to lead the most laps in 3 consecutive Indy 500s, and things were going great for the Oakland boys. In 1955, they both returned to the speedway. And again, Vukovich showed quick, looking to win 3 in a row, a feat never accomplished. Alleian, though, was not so lucky with his speed. For him, it came all the way down to bump day, driving the 68 Westwood Gauge and Tool car. In the final minutes before the last gun to end the day of qualification, the 68 would sprint out on track and begin the first of 3 allowed warm-up laps. Chugging through them, suddenly the car was called off. They deemed that he had not made it in enough time to make the run. The crowd that had assembled at the speedway booed as Ed slowed the car and began to come down pit lane. His crew began to file a review, and through a flurry of lobbying, they found the call was in fact wrong. And just past 7 p.m. local time, they decided to let the 68 make one last run. It'd be deemed the infamous Midnight Run, one of the first instances the track was active this late into the day. The front-engine car screamed around Indy, its noise echoing off the empty bleachers that now sat on the edges of the track. As time clocked in, Ed jumped into the race, making a run that was inspiring to many at the track and at home. On top of Vukovich going for the mythical 3 in a row, Ed was on track to prove himself as another upcoming racing great. All he needed was a perfect day with his best friend.
first turn of lap 3, Vukovic fights McGrath for the groove. He's passing. And Vukovic is in first place. McGrath second, Bettenhausen third, Hanks fourth.
During the race past the lap 50 mark, Bill is leading. Ed is running somewhere in the mid-pack, having a good day for starting so far back. Leading on the 57th lap, Bill charges through the south end of the speedway, barreling through turn 1. He races through the chute and into turn 2. But on the other side of that corner, just seconds before Vuki came through, Roger Ward would lose control and strike the outer wall. The car would flip and slide into the center of the track with a broken axle. Al Keller, seeing the incident, did his best to avoid a collision and spun towards the inside wall. He would spin back on track into the path of Johnny Boyd, who would slam into Keller and be pushed straight into the path of Bill Vukovic.
Roger Ward spins on the backstretch. The way clear, Boyd and Vukovic move right along, but Al Keller spins into them from the inside. Vuki is thrown over the rail, flipping helplessly.
Just after this happened, the 68 car driven by Ed Alleian came through, doing his best to avoid the wreck. But then he noticed Vukovic, upside down and on fire. Without thought and only instinct, Ed parked his car in the infield grass and unbuckled from his seat. He climbed from the cockpit, forfeiting him from the race, and ran across the active racetrack, jumping the barrier. As he approached Bill's car on the outside of the track, it laid on top of 2 parked vehicles and a fireball. He grabbed where he could to try and roll the car back over, but immediately drew back, being branded by the hot steel on the car. He attempted a second time, but the heat was too intense. Quickly, safety crews arrived, to which Ed again tried to help, but instead only hindered their efforts. He had to be physically restrained as he kept attempting to throw himself into the flames, many reported, to try and save Vukovic. And eventually, he was tranquilized and taken away by the medics, who were there for his fallen comrade. Regardless of if he could get through the inferno or not to help his friend, Bill was already dead. His neck had been broken during the cartwheels, and Ed was in shambles. He sat in a tranquilized daze, watching his friend and hero not only be killed, but borderline eviscerated. A fate no man should have to experience. Not only would he lose his friend, but also his ride. He was in trouble with his team owner since he forfeited a perfectly good race car. And on a day that was filled with so much potential, all Ed came away with was a hollow sportsmanship award for his attempt to save Bill, and 2 scars across his palms. A burning reminder of what he wasn't able to do. Now alone in his career, Ed charged on, jumping from one opportunity to the next. He would collect modest results through the rest of 1955, and moving into 1956, he would get another shot at Indy. He qualified 14th and finished 23rd. About 3 weeks later, on June 17th, he'd be racing at Salem Speedway, dueling with 1955 Indy 500 winner Bob Schweikert. As the 2 raced side by side, Schweikert would lose control and strike the barrier. He would flip over violently and sadly lose his life in the accident. Yet again, Alleian had been caught in another fatal racing crash with a racing icon. Not only was Schweikert the winner of the race Vukovic was killed in, he was also a well-respected driver outside of the Indianapolis 500. Ed, even before the Vukovic and Schweikert incidents, had been known as an aggressive race car driver. But now, with this incident with Schweikert, even though it wasn't his fault, it began countless conspiracy theories amongst fans and drivers, insinuating that Alleian, in fact, had contributed in some way to Schweikert's death. Some went as far to even believe that it was a concerted effort by Alleian to at least wreck the driver, in effect payback for winning the race his hero had been killed whilst leading in. To this day, no one will truly know the answer to any of these questions, but Alleian was building a reputation. And across the 1957 season, he had been caught writing checks that did not meet the value that was stated on them. His worsening financial state moved into 1958, when after another bad check, he got in a scuffle with a police officer, punching him in the process. Somehow, Alleian was about to make it back to the track and race during the month of May in 1958. This was possibly his last chance at not only winning the event, but even being in a competitive race car. Outside of his legal problems, Alleian viced in gambling, losing countless amounts of wealth on poor decisions. His reputation on track was still held in a decent regard, but he had become excluded outside the track. During qualifying for that year's 500, he'd arguably the fastest car, breaking the single-lap qualifying record and grabbing second. On the day of the race, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The field rolled off with the front row leading the charge. They pulled out and passed the pace car without knowing. The 1957 Pontiac Bonneville had been having issues starting all morning, and now it was having it at the worst time. The three on the front row sped around and caught the rear of the field. This prompted an extended period of time trying to fix the lineup before the green flag. In the confusion, they waved the green, with nearly half the field not rolling. Unaware that the race had actually got going, pole sitter Dick Rathman and Alleian charged through 1 and 2. Alleian got side by side off of 2 with Rathman and sprinted down the backstretch. Ed had the preferred groove heading into turn 3, but he went a touch too deep into the corner. The car bobbled and then made contact with Rathman.
Alleian has lost control. Rathman is forced into the wall. The track is blocked for the rest of the field. 3 other cars spin to avoid the wrecks. And a 4th. Watch it! He's rammed by 2 more. Look out! There goes another!
They both slid into the wall, and the rest of the field, some just finally getting to speed and sprinting into the corner, ran into a blocked racetrack. Jimmy Reese, the other front row starter outside of Ed and Dick, came in first and slammed on his brakes. Pat O'Connor, the car behind, was not expecting the stoppage, and he jumped wheels with Reese, going airborne to what some estimate was a height of 50 feet. The car landed upside down and then burst into a fireball. By the end of the incident, a total of 15 cars would pile into the accident, and Ed crashed against the outside wall, physically okay, but emotionally destroyed. As Ed made it back to the pit lane, a young A.J. Foyt would come in for service. As he would later recall in his book, Ed sat alone on the pit wall, his helmet off and his head in his hands. An opportunity of a lifetime ended not even 2 miles into the supposed 500-mile journey. The scorn of an entire sport was now pointed directly at him. Blame for the crash was rightfully placed on Alleian. He did cause the start of the accident, but what made matters worse was the fate of Pat O'Connor. The highly respected and well-liked driver had been killed in the accident, and in full view of drivers and fans. To put it lightly, what happened to Pat O'Connor was he was incinerated by the fire from his car. Many estimate that he did die before being burned, but the sight to everyone in attendance was more than scarring. Some described it as hell on earth. Ed's reputation only got worse when the rumors came out about how he made the move to pay off gambling losses, for he was thousands of dollars in debt. USAC had heard enough, and they suspended Ed for rough driving. They borderline exiled him from the sport for a short period of time, and whatever reputation he did have was now gone forever. This would be forever his legacy. In the month that followed, Ed went and raced at the new Bremen Speedway in a sprint car. He would be racing well until he spun and made contact with Jim Davis. They both flipped, and Ed would climb out. Jim would not. It had been one of the first times he had gotten back in a race car, and less than a month after his previous accident that caused the death of Pat O'Connor, he had now also been heavily involved in the accident that caused the death of Jim Davis. In a normal situation, most would just chalk this up to a racing accident. But for Ed Alleian, this was a targeted attack. He was blacklisted, hated, and now even more desperate. USAC would lift his suspension after a couple of weeks, but in September, it was renewed as more fraudulent checks emerged. he wouldn't even get a chance at the 1959 Indianapolis 500, and he'd finally make his USAC return in August at the Milwaukee Mile. He would be driving an emerald green roadster for Ernie Rutz, numbered 24. On the 28th lap of the event, AJ Foyt would have his engine let go, dumping oil all over the racetrack. The result was a spin for Ed. He slammed the fence and the car overturned once, landing upside down. The car immediately caught fire, and Ed was stuck, screaming for help. According to many eyewitnesses, the cars, even though the caution was out, kept at a race pace, halting safety workers from crossing the track to put out the fire. After a delayed 9-minute response, they finally ran and put the fire out. But Ed was already dead. He had burned to death inside the vehicle, and the race was red flagged to clean the incident. Exact information about the situation is sparse. Whilst reports say the drivers ran interference to, quote, let him burn, there is no actual evidence that the entire field made a complicit decision to do that. The only thing that does support that is it did take 9.5 minutes to put a fire out. And during that time, everyone in pit lane and in the grandstands reports seeing Ed waving his hands, screaming for help as the fire got larger. To this day, Ed Alleian's legacy is that of an incident he caused in the 1958 Indy 500, being the indirect cause of death to respected racing great Pat O'Connor. But while the story goes that Ed needed to pay off gambling debts, do you think that maybe for a moment, as he roared down the backstretch side by side with Dick Rathman, that he thought about the man that had brought him to Indianapolis? That he remembered watching his hero die on that very backstretch 3 years prior, and running to try and help him. Maybe that day he was racing for Vuki. And the scars of a helpless attempt wrapped around the steering wheel are the ones that lost control in turn 3. Regardless to why it happened, it will forever be a great loss. And to all those souls, those racing greats that came, accomplished, and perished doing the sport we all love, may they forever rest in peace.